All right, so this is my question. You want to know? What my question is?
I'm dying to know, Mitch.
Yeah, thanks, because I really want to. Why are we drinking shandies?
It's summertime.
Summertime.
Almost summertime.
Yeah.
Thank you. The beer was on sale. I didn't actually know what a shandy meant, but I'm happily refreshed by this beer mixed with citrus.
What I like about that is you bought the cheapest beer available, and it had grapefruit in it.
Yeah, it's also Cinco de Mayo, and I didn't think to get any Dos Equis or...
It's Cinco de Mayo, and we're drinking shandy.
Negra Modelo, I know. Well...
Isn't that it's a British drink, right?
Dos Equis?
No, shandies.
Oh. Yeah, it sounds British. Grapefruit and alcohol.
There's like a Tristram shandy. We're having a whole cultural fest.
Literally
here.
Tonight is the first time I've ever heard the term shandy.
All right, well, this is our special Cinco de Mayo episode of the Dukes of Hazzard.
Celebrating with shandy! All right, welcome everyone. We're back for 2 weeks in a row for podcasts. And you may have heard a third voice on the line. We're joined tonight by Brandon Greenberg.
Brandon!
Hey, Brandon.
Hey, guys.
Brandon is, let me read a little bit of your bio here. Brandon's calling in from Washington, D.C. He is a founder of DisasterNet, where he advises organizations and communities on the synergies between resilience, innovation, and technology. He has 10-plus years of experience in emergency response and disaster management and is pursuing a PhD from GWU in technology and disaster management. He also went to NYU Wagner School of Public Service and got a MPA from there. That's where we met Brandon up here, actually at a happy hour. And he's also got a graduate certificate in community preparedness and disaster management from UNC Chapel Hill Gilling School of Public Health. So again, welcome, Brandon. Thank you for joining us tonight.
You've actually been to all three of my favorite schools in disasters. I love UNC and Columbia, and GW all have just great programs.
Yeah.
So I think we're just honored to be in your academic presence.
Well, I'm racking up the degrees, and I'm pretty sure this is going to be my last degree. I'm done after this.
You say that now, but...
Double PhD. Go for a triple.
My fiance says I'm done.
How is it being a PhD student? I mean, are you surviving? Do you have to eat ramen all the time? Or are you kind of plugging through it?
No, we're plugging through it. You know, the PhD is a very unique experience because what you're focused on is really rigorous research. And in disasters, we often think, hey, what's relevant? But research is really about answering some very fundamental questions. And that was a mindset that was actually really hard to wrap my head around and get into. But now that I'm in it, it's very interesting, and I look forward to kind of balancing both the rigor and the relevance and the academic and the practitioner aspects of disaster management.
So another thing that's great about you, is, if you didn't know this, is that you sent out this awesome newsletter of kind of emergency management articles, disaster technology, disaster response things. And what I want to know is how do you find these articles? They're great, and with everything else you're doing, where do you come up with these articles that you send out?
Well, it's quite a number of years I've just really been focused on finding some really good content and ways in which to find that content. So it's like I've almost honed my personal environment for finding articles, and I've kind of put that into like an RSS feed that I kind of capitalize on for the newsletter. So every week, people will get kind of almost a curated list of articles on emerging tech and innovation in the field.
Yeah.
You're like the BuzzFeed of disaster management.
It really is. Yeah, so if you want to sign up for the newsletter, go to disasternet.co and sign up for it.
I was really impressed with your answer to the PhD process because I'm married to a professor, and usually when I ask people how their PhD is going, they just cry. So just the fact that you can manage that eloquent of a response is really impressive.
Honestly, maybe I'm just crying on the inside.
Are you drinking a shandy? Because that's what's really important.
No, I'm having an ode to New York and drinking a Red Hook here.
Oh, nice.
He's got real
Brooklyn,
beer.
even Brooklyn.
Real beer.
Brooklyn beer.
All right, so we're going to just do some disaster news here to start things off. And, we were actually having a conversation. It's ladies' night here at our recording studio. Not for us, but for the ladies. And we were having this discussion about the drought in California. And Slate and New York Magazine published this really provocative piece called about the end of avocados, like asking if you could have your last avocado anytime soon. I wanted to ask you guys, so everybody knows that it takes a gallon of water. Well, actually, I learned this from you, that it takes a gallon of water to grow a pistachio.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
It's about that for an almond.
So says the internet.
Yeah, well, the internet never lies. But so how many gallons of water do you think it takes to grow a pound of avocados? Guesses?
4 gallons?
I hear 4.
I'd say like 500 gallons.
Oh, see, you're just blowing the numbers.
I'm doing the Price is Right technique
man.
of taking the highest.
Now it's going to not be impressed. It's 72. 72 is the answer to grow 1 pound of avocado.
Jeez.
And so water in California has gone through these drought conditions. It's gone from $72 per acre foot of water, which is about 326,000 gallons, to $1,500 per acre foot of water. And so it is hitting agriculture on all kinds of fronts, all over the place, and basically just destroying things. And the amazing thing to me about it, and I don't know if you guys know any more about this, is California entered their state of emergency, their declared emergency for a water disaster in January of last year, of 2014, and they've been in it consistently since then. Meaning that at this point, all they're doing is working on drought reduction. It's now mandatory. It's legal. And I learned that the cities in California have only reduced their water consumption by 3%. That's it. After all of that push. So
wow.
It's really sad, and it's really starting to move from kind of interesting and concerning to legitimately scary. So I don't know. I mean,
right.
From now on, we only drink beer.
Well, beer, it's funny, when we were looking up stats for this, beer is something like 600 gallons of water for 1 gallon of beer. So no better there. In fact, we're probably harming the environment right now.
You're telling me that my guacamole and my beer is getting more expensive?
That's exactly right. And in fact, that whole thing last year, Chipotle said they weren't going to sell guacamole anymore. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And then that was a lie, except this year, Florida has now a new fungus that is killing avocados.
No way.
So more than 6,000 trees in Florida have died because of this fungus called laurel wilt that is taking out the trees. So Florida is working on an emergency response to their dead avocados. And do you know what is doing the work for them?
No, I do not.
I'm going to tell you. It is
drone watch.
It's
drones.
It's drones and dogs working
way.
together. So what they did is they created this infrared filter on the drones. The drones can look at the trees, spot the fungus before they can be detected, and then they kill those trees and they bury the fruit and they destroy the fungus before it gets onto the other trees.
Interesting.
So I'm just saying, eat your guacamole now, because the drought and the fungus are coming to kill it.
You wonder if we're going to be writing kind of emergency water shortage plans in the future. You wonder if that'll be a real kind of thing as natural resources go away, if that's going to be something that kind of touches on the disaster preparedness field.
Have I ever told the story on this podcast about how New York City got its water? So New York City has all this water, great water from upstate New York. Apparently what happened is they passed it in the legislature in Albany beginning of the 20th century, that they got these reservoirs, and then that Sunday, while everybody was at church, they snuck up there and seized the property that the water was on.
Wow.
Yeah, they just waited till church and took it.
It was like private property, and
they just seized it, by right of the state.
Yeah.
And took it and posted guards around it, and ever since then it's been New York City property.
Wow. Playing music?
Oh,
no, that's it.
No, right. Hey, I will. Ready?
All right, so we're doing a special thing tonight where all the stories, or 99.9% of the stories, we're pulling from Brandon's blog, disasternet.co. So this is another story. And Brandon doesn't know we've chosen these stories. We're surprising him with them. But one of the ones that caught my eye is a story about bolstering critical infrastructure resilience after Superstorm Sandy. This was actually pulled from emergencymanagement.com. And one of the lines in here is that critical infrastructure carries the lifeblood of our nation and our individual communities. We continue to act as though these roads, pipelines, harbors, etc. will last forever, but they're not. And so my question for both of you is, what's easier to justify to a community, to your community, if you're an emergency manager? Plans, trainings, exercises, evaluations, or updating critical infrastructure?
Yeah, Brandon, Brandon, you take that.
Brandon, take this one.
Factor. And, looking at critical infrastructure, it's so tough because it's like, well, we have to make multi-year investments in infrastructure, and that is not sexy. And so when you look at exercises and things like that, you can put pictures up. You can show that you're doing something that's meaningful. That's usually my opinion on kind of what sells and what's easier to kind of sell investments on.
Yeah.
Isn't it? I mean, New York City did this massive post-Sandy resilience thing. The SIR project, they released all these. And it was, I guess I would say at the end it was pretty sexy because you could put up these big 3D displays of like new plazas and greenery and berms and all of this stuff.
Yeah, it's almost like critical infrastructure has the potential to be, the public can see, it cost $1 billion, but we have a new, parkland that is absorbing the floodwater, and we have raised subway grates now on the sidewalk. Whereas, if you spend $2 million on updating a plan, it's like, does the community public even know about that? The bottom line is you need both, right?
You do.
You need critical infrastructure updates, but you also need updated plans, current, accurate plans.
I think plans are really the problem, right? Those are the least at least in anything that gets you good TV footage,
right,
I feel like is okay.
Trainings and exercises are great.
Right, Brandon's point, right?
Those are extremely tangible, too.
Yes.
No, that's totally right.
Point.
But is there a way to do critical infrastructure, I guess, that is sexier? Brandon, in the stuff that you've written, is there any way to make that sort of more appealing or easier to pass, or let's face it, cheaper than it usually is?
I think a lot of the studies show that it actually is a lot cheaper. But I think one of the ways is kind of how does it improve everyday life? So if we're making these infrastructure improvements, one of the things that come to mind is what's the value that you're adding? It's not just a value of like, hey, something happened, we can do this better, but it's how do we improve the daily lives of the people that we're serving? So if it's going to be raising the berm on something, well, can you add a particular sidewalk or park that enhances the lives of people around you?
Yeah, I think that's
great.
That's one of the great points I love about resilience-focused thinking and infrastructure in particular, because it's hard to do that with an exercise. Actually, it's hard to make that stuff dual use in a way that supports people's lives.
And even harder with like a internal agency emergency response plan.
So, Brendan, since you do tech stuff, you work in that space. Is there work in that area that counts as kind of critical infrastructure building, or is when we talk about that, are we really talking about sort of flood prevention and that sort of work?
Well, when you say critical infrastructure, it runs the gamut, right? You talk about resilience. You could talk about built environment. You can talk about technology resilience and as infrastructure. You can talk about a lot of different things. So it's technology, where I've seen it most applied right now is in analytic models. It's gathering data to understand how to actually protect and build resilience. That's some of where I see some of the biggest information and technology advancements being made.
So does the data help make it sexier, I guess? This is, data, it's hard to sell too. We have a lot of evidence-based approaches. It's hard to get those through. Have people figured out a way to make the data sort of sellable?
I don't know if they made it sellable yet. It's certainly brought about, the availability of data has certainly brought about a lot of initiatives to kind of analyze things. I think NYU Poly just actually started a whole New York State funded resilience program, and so they're starting to take a very close look at what it means to be resilient, especially in the built environment.
And I guess last thing on this, and we should move on, but does resilience help or hinder the preparedness mission as you've seen it? Because I feel like one thing I've heard emergency managers say is, resilience is important, but it could come at the cost of training and exercises. If you live in a place that has that has higher flood walls or that is sort of more protected from various aspects, then it's harder in turn to sell the training and exercise programs. Is that a problem you guys have seen, or do you think they kind of go hand in hand?
I think there ends up being confusion over what resilience is really about versus what preparedness is about, right? Resilience is really about the balance between mitigating issues and dealing with those issues. And preparedness is fundamentally about how do we deal with those issues. When we think about preparedness training, exercises, planning, we're planning for something to go wrong. And so that deals with only one aspect of resilience.
Yeah, good. All right, let's move on. Brandon, I'm going to read... Oh, my God!
Yeah, I remember to do a transition that time.
That was a good transition. That's one of our best. All right, Brandon, I'm going to read a quote, and you just tell me what you think of this quote, all right? Every single decision EOC responders make depends on accurate, complete, and current situational awareness.
Yes, you took a great look at my blog post today.
Exactly, yes. I love that article, and I was wondering if you could just kind of summarize that article and kind of what you thought of that quote for us.
Yeah, so it's a very overly simplistic quote that we really need accurate, complete, and current information to support disaster operations. And I can't disagree with this more. I mean, the reality is that we don't live in a world where we have accurate, complete, and current situational awareness. It's just not realistic. Some information is better than others, and what we really need to focus on is that when we do collect information, we need to be able to describe that information. We need to be able to say, hey, this is 2 hours old and only covers 50% of the city. That is still useful information. And we can only understand that if we have some of what I call this meta information to just go, okay, let me go through my own thought processes and go and judge the value of this information for what I need to do.
Yeah.
And so I wrote this article basically with this idea that, no, don't worry about accurate, complete, and current information. Worry about describing what that information is providing you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great point, and I think this kind of goes against some of what we've been taught kind of in emergency management. You go out there, you find the most accurate information, you get the critical data that's accurate, and then you make decisions based on the data once you have gathered the data and assured that it's correct. And I think, people who've been in disasters have discovered that's impossible.
Yeah, but I'm going to put on my polo shirt and my tactical pants here, and I'm going to say, I mean, but Brandon, how do you... Yes, I have
belt clip.
And a belt clip, maybe even a pen. What are those things called? Pocket protectors.
Pocket protectors, yeah.
And I'm gonna say, look, Brandon, what's the threshold? Like, if I have data that's hours old and it only covers half the city, how do I know it isn't harmful? How do I know that acting on that information isn't actually going to cause a mistake in the response?
Well, I mean, that's up to you as a professional to really understand and to be able to grapple with data and information. If you say it's hours old, right, but it's the only information you got, well, you can start to kind of go through a thought process in your head. Hey, it's 12 hours old. It's all I got. I've been hearing some other things that are going on in this response. And you can say, listen, I trust it or I don't trust it. Yeah, and you can work from there.
Sorry. And I would also say you probably are going to make mistakes, and that's the nature of emergency response. You take the information you have at the time, you make decisions and take action based on that, and then when you have better information, sometimes you reverse course or change course.
Yeah, but me and my tactical pants, I mean, it's not just me, right? There are like 20 of me in a room with a whiteboard, and isn't there any kind of threshold or guidance that the data analytic field can give me about what is good data versus bad data, right? In terms of triaging it, winnowing the wheat from the chaff. I mean, isn't there anything? Because what I've heard in meetings is people's instinct is just to throw it all away. I mean, just chunk it and not even worry about it unless you can really vet it in some way.
Well, it's not the vetting that's usually the issue. I think that's what people say. But really, it's the ability to process that information because you're being thrown information at you from 20 different directions, and not all of it is valuable. Maybe 1% of it is valuable to you. This is what happens with social media. Social media is incredibly valuable, but when you look at the millions of tweets, it's only a very select percentage that are very valuable. And so what you need to do is say, well, we have 3 million tweets. We have to figure out some way to filter through all of them. And that time and effort is not possible in a disaster.
I think that's a good point. So you're finally making my tactical pants happy, which is that, you kind of backed into Enrico Quarantelli's 5th criteria for managing disasters, right? Which is processing that flood of information. And I think that the duty there, or the problem with the response is to be able to take it in, have the judgment and kind of the discernment, I guess. Let's say discernment of the information that comes in and how you're going to filter it and use it. I guess that's the thing about emergency managers is a lot of us get gun shy, or you start to back off from decisions like that, and that's exactly when you have to think and wrestle and deal with the limitations of the stuff that's coming in.
Yeah. It's not just about, hey, I can do all these fancy analytics. It's you got to be able to assess the data and what's worth your time and effort.
I think that's just a great discussion. It's clear that you felt strongly about this one. I mean, is there any other blog post from that? What's breaking me is that, sorry, I'm watching Andrew eat a cookie and he had to take off his ear. I'm going to just narrate that whole thing. He took off his earpiece. He leaned away from the microphone, and he was like,
Mitch's wife brought up these amazing
down.
Cookies, and I couldn't resist, so I'm trying to hide it, but not successfully.
I think at that point I'm going to have to cue a transition. Okay, so we were going to talk a little bit about Nepal here in the middle of our time together. Let me just kind of frame this a little bit. So we talked about this a little bit on the show last time. So it was a 7.8 magnitude earthquake. At this point, there are more than 7,500 casualties of it, and there are kind of a couple of reports that are coming out that are the kind of things you see 7 days after a response, which is this sort of blame cycle, where aid groups are accusing the government of delaying response in different ways by saying that they're requiring sort of full customs inspections on things that are coming into the country. They're saying that money that is donated needs to go to this Prime Minister's Fund the government has established, not to the different groups that are actually there on the ground, which is turning some people who are donating money into sort of criminals because they're trying to give to a charity and it's supposed to be going through the Nepalese government. And on the other side, the government is saying, listen, there are all of these aid groups on the ground who are not coordinated, who are kind of impacting our response because they're just going out and doing whatever they want to do, but they're not sort of deciding in a comprehensive way where to send the aid. So there's a lot of that's happening. And we wanted to focus in, because we have you here, Brandon, on the kind of social media and technology work that's happening in Nepal. And then we can get into the other stuff too. But I'm wondering if you could just take a second and talk us through some of the ways that social media and technology are being used in this response.
Yeah, well, I'll start with social media. So social media gets a lot of front page press sometimes, and kind of how it's used. There's a couple efforts that are going on right now to kind of take a lot of the tweets that are out there and put them through kind of this human and computer interaction. It's called micromappers. And the idea is, let's just dump all the tweets into a system called AIDR. And the idea is that the system will figure out how to task out looking at these photos to hundreds and thousands of volunteers. And each photo will go through several reviewers, with the goal of identifying a picture or a tweet that is potentially useful to a decision maker. So this goes back to some of our previous conversations about helping to filter information to get to the relevant stuff. and that's being done. That's kind of some of the most detailed work that's being done. In other types of work, there's different types of analyses and aggregate that are being done to understand as a whole what's going on, who's reporting what, from where. There are various different tools that are probably being employed right now that I'm not too familiar with as well. So that's on the social media side. And of course, that's how a lot of NGOs raise money, is they have social media campaigns as well, and that's hitting a lot of the kind of around the world.
So
in terms of, go ahead.
Let me just, the micromappers thing, are there that many volunteers out there? I mean, can you crowdsource that stuff in a disaster? Are people really processing through these pictures image by image?
They are, but you do need that kind of human capital to do that. And I do believe Micromappers and a few others have built a base of volunteers, technology volunteers to kind of support. It's not even tech. You don't even need to be a technologist to support Micromappers. You can just be a person with a smartphone and kind of get on and just say, yes, this photo is relevant or not relevant.
And I guess the big elephant in the room that's been in a lot of the press is Facebook Safety Check. So could you walk us through that and kind of how it's being used?
Yeah, so the intent behind Facebook Safety Check is to provide a way for affected individuals and their families to connect in a disaster very easily and say, I am okay. So it kind of reduces that worry and kind of adding to the response of going, trying to weed through everybody who's trying to find their loved ones who may or may not have been affected. So the tool kind of literally, it's geofenced, which just means that, they're going to say all the IP addresses in Nepal, or anybody who lists Nepal as their, where they currently live or something, will get a notification saying, are you okay? And they just click the button that says, yes, I am okay. And it goes out to their Facebook friends on that. So on the individual side, that's great. For an emergency management side, and the analytics and the information that comes from that, which is not public, could be extremely helpful to decision makers.
One thing about that is there's not a lot of subtlety there, right? You either say sort of, yes, I'm okay, or that's it, right? There's not even another choice. So there's not a way to say, I'm sort of okay, I'm okay.
I'm alive, but I'm...
Right, I have these needs. I don't have food, I don't have water, I don't have power. Is Facebook worried about getting into those things? I mean, or are they providing any of this information to emergency management authorities?
As far as I know, they're not. I don't know what they're doing with this or what kind of liabilities that they're considering kind of in promoting this tool. But I do know that I don't think they're working with kind of emergency managers on the back end to kind of sift through this data and identify people in need.
I think it's a great first step. I mean, you just even that level of information could go a long way in finding out what the status of people are that have been affected by a disaster. I do wonder, thoughts come in of like, well, what happens if all the network's out? I mean, I'm sure Nepal, the critical infrastructure was crippled in this, and I wonder how long it took before cell phone networks or internet networks were back up.
Well, they're still not up. I mean, right now, I think at the very least it's been 3 or 4 days without internet connectivity from the onset, and then as kind of UN OCHA and some other tech teams have descended upon, they have set up, I see, information communications technology infrastructure, but it's not widespread. It's for the uses of almost responders in a way.
Right.
Yeah. And that's kind of one of my concerns. I'm a little worried about this kind of developing world versus developed world mentality. I mean, the picture you could paint in the most negative light is kind of Nepal is down, the critical infrastructure is destroyed. Here come all of these sort of really developed NGOs with Silicon Valley types who want to test out different technologies, and they deploy them, and there are all these like really sexy case studies, and there's like neon and people wearing sunglasses, and they're kind of doing disaster porn a little bit, but the information never gets to the authorities. I guess do you know how this is actually being used on the ground? Is there utility to it in the operations that are happening?
So I can't comment too much on the intentions, but I will say that there's a lot of, I think, good intent. There may be some hidden intent, but I think overall there's some really good intent by different NGOs, firms, tech firms, organizations that are out there trying to support response efforts. I think a better question really, though, is what value do these provide, these tech solutions and communication solutions? A colleague of mine, Rakesh from Cisco, just wrote a post about a week ago on evidence-based information and communications technology. We need to understand the value that and the impact of what's going on. We know satellite phones are great, we know networks are great, but are the way that they're configured really helping, or is it just okay and it's kind of working?
So shifting a little bit, what do you guys think about the Prime Minister Fund that was set up? The idea that they want all donations to go to the government, and then the government decides how to dole it out.
Yeah, what's interesting about that is, I know Paul Farmer is in some hot water over Ebola response stuff lately, but I remember one thing that struck me after the Haiti response was his critique and to a certain extent the Clinton Global Initiative critique of this after Haiti, which was that after Haiti people donated to NGOs, didn't give to the government, and it left the government in a weakened long-term position, unable to supply aid long-term. So when I first read about this fund, actually, I had this really positive response because I was like, great, that makes so much sense. Let's give to the government because it will be there long after these NGOs have left. But then the new wrinkle is kind of this, you actually can't give to the NGOs, you have to give to the government, which takes us too far in the other direction because the government doesn't seem to be then quickly distributing these resources, because it's this real bind. I have so much loyalty to government authorities in these situations because I want to be able to give sustainable help in a comprehensive way and not focus on this or that hot topic, which NGOs are amazing and doing incredible work, but they just don't have the scope to cover a whole country. But at the same time, you can't criminalize people giving to a charity. That just seems so counterproductive. Brandon, what do you think?
When I think of this and I hear this story, I immediately think of kind of command and control and centralization of resources, which if you're not set up to manage, is actually going to hinder your response. So, in a way, these donations provide the ability for NGOs to just go out and try and do good wherever they're at. And so it kind of spreads the wealth a bit and the abilities of responders to help and not have to wait for direction.
Hold on. Brendan, are you speaking ill of ICS?
Wait a minute. Hold the phone. Who let you on here?
My personal brain always thinks in terms of networks and understanding that there's not always a hierarchy that needs to be followed. And I kind of follow Clay Shirky's model of collaboration without coordination. And so that's kind of what pops in my mind is, ICS is good for very specific efforts, but it's not always practical in large-scale, geographically distributed disasters.
So I guess let's push that a little bit, though. So I'm in Nepal. I'm a decentralized network of responding assets in different places. How do I make sure that the benefits of a particular technology, like social media knowledge or these micro mapping benefits, aren't just part of one agency's response or one NGO's response, that those benefits are spread across all of the responding networks? If there's not a command structure in place, how do we make sure that that information is kind of promulgated across everybody?
Well, I think what I'm going to talk about right now is something that's not yet in play, and that's governance, right? Governance is something different than command and control. And governance plays more into networks and understanding kind of how the players work together. In a way, OCHA is trying to go with this model, the Office of Coordination for Humanitarian Affairs. But in practice, it's a lot more difficult to say, hey, listen, it's almost like saying, listen, just follow these rules, but go out and do good. That's the concept of governance within a disaster context. And I don't know if that's fully there yet. So right now what we have is a lot of people doing good, and there probably is duplication of effort, redundancies in certain areas, gaps in other areas. And so that's kind of what happens at the moment.
Yeah, I think the other wrinkle to this is the hesitancy by international donors to give directly to government. And whether it's true or not, there's a perception that government is corrupt. And I think certainly there is probably corruption in some NGOs, but at least there's some accountability within NGOs. They have to be accredited. They have to be rated. There is some level of transparency where I think for the most part, maybe donors don't necessarily see that in the government, and they would be hesitant to give.
You know, what strikes me about this, and I'm not asking you guys to sign on to it, but Brendan, when you were talking, what I was thinking of is something like a decentralized ICS structure. See, I'm assuming every listener of this podcast can just project the ICS org chart in front of their head.
We should say what ICS stands for, just in case.
Really? You think so?
I mean, I do have friends that aren't in emergency management.
I can't sing. That's what it...
Wait, you don't know ICS? I don't understand.
I've never heard of this. Incident Command System.
So the way it works then, so now what do I have to do, is that you have an incident commander, and the commander has...
commander, not commando.
That's right.
You want a British now?
And I'm drinking shandies, and there's underneath there, I mean, there are lots of positions, but there's basically like a planning group and a logistics group and a finance group and then an operational group. And what we're essentially talking about is instead of an operational group, you have lots of different decentralized agents who are going out and doing good in various places. But when we talk about getting the benefits of information to them, I guess what I'm picturing is some other decentralized network that is working on processing this flood of information in a decentralized way and sending it out. Like kind of like all of those operational groups in some sense being able to share a planning section, right? I mean,
well, that's the definition of an emergency operations center. I mean, they are a coordinating entity, and one of the things that they coordinate is information.
So they should be the ones that say, "Hey, we're really duplicating efforts in this area. Let's hold here. Let's
yeah."
Here's
I mean, that's more of a governance model. It's the question of, well, how far do they push that into operations, and they start making decisions and taking action.
And that's where they get into trouble, I think, is what we're saying. Is if you're one EOC in the middle of Nepal, and the UN did this, right? They stood up and you were just talking about this, a coordination center. But that coordination center isn't going to have the resources to boss everybody around, but it might have the resources to distill and process information that benefits everybody. Is that kind of what you're pointing to?
Yeah, and there are different aid groups that are really starting to do this. OCHA does have a group for specifically dealing with information managers. The Digital Humanitarian Network helps leverage other organizational partners to support information sharing, and the Standby Task Force helps to process a lot of information, as well as the Humanitarian OpenStreetMaps team as well. So there are resources. I don't know if they're extraordinarily well aligned right now, but they are trying to work towards this goal of better information and better sharing of that information.
It's interesting. You wonder if a few more, God forbid, of these international disasters, you'll see management of international disasters kind of surpass the efficiency of domestic disaster response. I mean, if this kind of decentralized response really takes off and becomes effective, I wonder if you could see a change, at least in the United States, in incident command.
Well, what's interesting to me is that the International Association of Emergency Managers right now is looking at governance standards. Is that, Brandon, I don't know if you know anything about this, but they're looking at exactly these rules of when you deploy internationally, you can't use ICS, but what can you do? Like what standards can you apply across all the different complex humanitarian emergencies you hit?
Wow.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I'm not familiar with that.
So I'm just going to break there. Totally. This is actually, you know what I'm trying to do in this episode is have the worst transitions possible.
I think we're succeeding.
Make them as awkward and uncomfortable as possible.
We could just, like, our transition could maybe me going like, and then just start the next story.
Brandon, I'm really sorry you're not here because I had one of the cookies after Andrew did, and I did the exact same thing, trying to eat it away from the microphone, and they're really good. Yeah. No, I really like those.
We'll mail you one, Brandon.
Yeah.
Well, we got Girl Scout cookies over here. So.
Oh man! All right.
Hey, man.
All right. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna just put our Wayne's World hats on, or our Who Goes to the Future?
Bill and Ted.
Bill and Ted. There we go. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. And we're gonna just go to, I don't even know what 10 years in the future is. 2025. There we go. Thank God. Math is deserting me. So it's 2025, and what is different about emergency management? What are the things that we're testing now, that we're playing with now, that we're kind of tossing around now, that by then, Brandon, do you think are going to be sort of real and ingrained, so that even the people in the polo shirts and the tactical pants are going to be using them with their belt clips?
Well, I think we're going to see a lot more standardization of technology in the next 10 years. So we're going to start to see maybe 20 different platforms be able to work together. So I think you're going to see that kind of model or market model emerge with different technologies. So you may have one dashboard, but that dashboard can then share it with another organization that uses a different dashboard. I think that's one of the big things that we're going to start to see. I think we're going to start to see a mastering of human and computer interaction and understanding, well, what do computers do really well, and what do humans do really well, and how do they work together really well? So we're going to see technologies that maybe focus a lot more on processing and filtering, while leaving a lot of the decision-making and cognitive aspects to humans. And there's going to be a symbiotic relationship between the two of them.
So we're going to be cyborgs, basically.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, when you think about it, we have Google Glass that's coming up, and maybe that's a really neat idea in 10 years, that it morphs into a slightly more usable concept, hey, Google Glass, process all this information. And then you go from there and you go, thanks for getting it for me. Now I have all my information, and I'm going to make a decision, and that happens in about 15 seconds.
So one thing I wanted to dig into a little bit is you talked about that this dashboard may be able to talk to this dashboard, and we're blending them. Can you actually just drop back a second and talk for a second about dashboarding and what it takes to make a good sort of dashboard? Because I feel like every executive in the world keeps saying, I want a dashboard, I want a dashboard, I want a dashboard. But I think people aren't clear on what you need to make sure you're actually doing something that visualizes useful and productive information.
Yeah, so this is a very interesting. I'm glad you actually kind of pushed me on this. Dashboards aren't simple. It's a display of information for your information needs, for your decision-making needs. So what that display of information could be a variety of things. It could be different graphs, charts, listings of data that you need to better do your job. The problem is that to create those dashboards, the data and the information comes from so many different sources. So you're dealing with the possibility that you can't always get all the information you want. In a business environment, you can do better with a dashboard because you own most of the information. In a disaster context, you don't own a lot of the information, so you have to develop relationships with other organizations to share that data, which is a very time-consuming and intensive process because you have to deal with data security and confidentiality and different things. And I almost wish that process was standardized as well. I hope to see that actually. There's a standard information sharing agreement that occurs, and you just list your data and people can just take it. But then the dashboards also provide key benchmarks and metrics to help you gain an understanding of the situation. And in disasters, we don't always have consistent metrics that are out there. I think healthcare is probably the most consistent, but it's not always like that. But you use these metrics to understand what is happening. They're almost proxies for what's really happening. You see a slight inflection point in a graph, and you want to question that. And because you saw that inflection point, you can then maybe dive a little deeper to understand what's going on, or maybe not, or maybe it's just nothing.
One thing you write about a lot, is not just tech, but kind of the way that tech and economics align, right? Tech and the powers of the market. So, 10 years from now, when Cyborg Me is wearing my enhanced Google Glass above the tactical pants, what is the effect that market economics is going to be having on what I'm trying to do? How is that going to be in play in disasters in ways it isn't right now?
That's a tough question, because right now market economics has a huge impact on kind of the innovation cycle of disaster technology. So I guess what I would say to that is, in 10 years we're gonna see potentially technology embedded within everyday technologies. So it's not that you're going out and you're buying an emergency management solution. You're buying a solution for your organization that has more of a emergency management component, module, or something integrated
inside of it
that supports your work.
So you think the market will have caught up to this now? So these solutions that people use now, like WebEOC or EM2000 or DLAN or whatever, those things will either they'll have to sort of compete better and catch up with market standards, or current business systems will have kind of integrated disaster management modules in them already.
Yeah, and because the value add to that is that when you have it integrated into your everyday systems, your data can be pulled very easily.
And
You're
also,
not creating external connections.
Yeah, and also it integrates emergency management to the day-to-day operations of people who are not in emergency management, right? So it decentralizes emergency planning, emergency response, which helps the field.
Yeah.
It's something everybody does, not one group of people in one company.
So
Yeah.
Brendan, I'm going to ask you to wildly speculate in a little bit, which is, do you think that in these 10 years, that emergency management as a field gets more democratized? That is, more and more people are kind of involved, and because it's just more integrated into the work of businesses and government, or does it become more specialized, right? Because people have to sort of know more and more stuff to know how to do it.
I don't know if it's either or. I think it's both. You need people who have the kind of the ability to just do things, and you need people who have the ability to kind of look at the big picture and situation. They do fundamentally different jobs. I think what we're seeing now is more of a democratization of participation. So we're saying, listen, not every job has to be done by a professional. It can be done by somebody who is a trained accountant. And yes, we do need accountants, and we're going to leverage you.
What do you think is, the biggest deal? I mean, if you were to look at emergency management tech right now, of all of the innovations that are happening and will happen in the next few years, what do you think is going to reshape disaster response most fundamentally?
Any technology that improves process. I don't care what kind of analytics you can do or what fancy visualizations you do. If it improves process, it's going to be in better shape. And that process should be the engagement of both professionals, non-professionals, in multitude of organizations. So if you can improve that management process of everything that's going on, those technologies are the ones that are going to thrive because they actually make people's jobs easier.
And that's really hard to do. I'm just thinking through now of what technology, what things out there help decision-making process in an emergency. There's a lot of things that say they do, but what actually does.
Yeah.
I think that's really good.
I see so many solutions that are great. It's like, we can produce this kind of visualization and use this kind of analytic model and I'm like, great, but what does it take to produce that? And it takes so much time and effort that is not. This goes back to our earlier conversation. It actually adds more work to the emergency manager, and that's not what they want.
It's my favorite, actually, technological innovation in an EOC that I've ever seen is a list.
A whiteboard. I was going to say a whiteboard.
It is.
It is a whiteboard.
Just the only thing that I've ever seen so far that has actually helped decision making in real time in an emergency operations system is a massive projected screen with just a list on it where every time something new happens, you type that thing on the list.
Yeah.
Which seems ridiculous and rudimentary, but that and whiteboarding actually really do help the process in the EOC because of how fluid they are. So I guess that's the question of
how fluid the response is.
Well,
right?
how fluid? Well, both the response is fluid, and those are the only things because they're so dumb, right? Because they're so basic, they're fluid enough to kind of keep up. Because you don't have to do a separate analytical post process, right? You don't say you don't ask a question and an hour later something happens. You can kind of keep up. So I guess the question is, to what you're saying, Brendan, you would have to have these other solutions catch up to that same speed of response.
I mean, I literally was following an email listserv thread today about the Nepal response, and somebody put together a list of like 40 maps. I can guarantee you not everybody's looking at that 40 maps, and one person whose job it is to create useful maps said, listen, the disaster managers who are very experienced, all they want is the printed map on a wall that they can walk up to and look at things.
Yeah.
Because there's a value that printed map has, and an easiness that online maps don't have.
And I guess that's partly because what you're doing there so let's just say that's a technological solution, right? Printed map on a wall, that's like technology at work. And what it's doing is it's giving you this kind of cognitive buffer, like your brain is so overloaded in the disaster, and putting it there visual and tactile gives your brain a hand, right? It lets you download the whole area into your head in a way that the computer screen doesn't. So how else do you I mean, that's the kind of solution we're looking for all the time, right? Is how else do you, everybody needs like one of those CNN smart boards where you can touch things and move them around, like in Minority Report, like that kind of thing. That's what we need.
Or Wolf Blitzer, I think he's got one.
Yeah, in his
He's
bedroom.
got everything.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's a great, I mean, I think that's a great discussion.
Yeah.
A lot of that. In 10 years, we'll have you back, Brendan, and we'll see
what we went wrong.
how we did.
Oh, God. We'll pull out the quotes.
That's my smooth jazz piano
nice.
transition.
It's the best transition we've had.
I know, it's not saying a lot. So this is, we actually got a listener question. I like how I say we actually, like, we're just not used to these.
They're few and far between.
And they keep coming in. And this question was about cyber attack. So this listener works for a company. And at the company, they work on things like Stuxnet and cyber DMZs, which I'm not totally clear on what those things are. But they wanted to know about cyber attacks and companies, things they needed to do to prepare for cyber attacks, and how that's different from then working on the recovery of cyber attacks. And they actually were looking for some names, so we can work on that offline. And I know none of us are really experts on the specifics of cyber attacks. But I know there's some, DOD has been working on new guidance. We're under threat of this a lot. Several groups have been hacked. We've talked about those on the show. So I guess let's just talk a little bit about this question of prevention of cyber attacks and recovery. And in particular, I think, Brendan, you can highlight a couple of technologies in this idea of mesh networks that might be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to say that when you look at, there's a couple different ways to approach cybersecurity. One is to kind of keep everybody out. The other is to kind of have a managed response that is really not much different than your disaster management approach to managing a disaster. The only difference is your situation or your scenario is really an IT scenario, so recovery really changes. But one of the things that is kind of changing the game is a company called an organization. It's actually a nonprofit and a technology called Landline, ldln.co. And their whole mission is actually changing kind of our understanding of network infrastructure. And they're saying, hey, let's put an intermediary between our organizational networks, and internet access. So in a disaster, what will happen is you can easily transfer and exchange information between different networks. That example is a little bit more on how do we share information, but there's a lot of ways that may open up a lot of doors in terms of, well, how secure is that data?
I think you're making that is really helpful, and the essential point that you're making is that, just like we can't protect against other disasters, just like we have mitigation and preparedness, we have to just understand that we can no longer keep out cyber attacks. I think for a long time it was just a security response. People were looking at building firewalls and building up structures, and we just can't do it anymore. So now we have to figure out how to integrate responding to them into regular emergency management paradigms and into just daily functions.
Yeah. One of the most practical ways I've seen, a friend that works for a large federal agency, and they actually ban any non-company related internet use. So you can't get on Gmail, you can't surf the internet at all on your desktop, but they provide a Wi-Fi network, and you're allowed to bring in your own personal devices and link up to this Wi-Fi network, and that you can check your Gmail, you can surf the net, whatever, which I think is a pretty brilliant idea. Doesn't, it's not 100% guarantee, but it's just like one practical way that they've tried to mitigate against viruses and cyber attacks.
Are there ways that the technologies that you're talking about, Brandon, not just cyber attack technologies, but these other things, are they particularly vulnerable to cyber attacks? I mean, one thing we talk about in regular attacks is you're always looking for the second bomber, right? Like in Mumbai or in London, an attack happens and then somebody comes along and they try and attack the response itself. So how good are disaster response technologies at resisting cyber attacks like this?
I think they're fairly resistant. I can't really speak too much about their kind of security posture, but I can't imagine that they would go on and be not secure in any way. I think there are a couple new types of technologies that are out there that are just kind of in that infant stage where, okay, security right now is not their primary priority, but they will get to it as their software or their technology matures.
Yeah, and I think the other part about it is the reason security isn't their primary concern right now is because they want to get something done, right? And I think what we face in disasters is this real tension between, and even in the example you brought up, Andrew, right, between getting something done and security right now are like opposing forces. I guess, is there any way technology to get around that dichotomy?
This is a huge debate right now because there is a huge movement for open government and open data, which kind of flies inherently in the face of data security. It changes the approach. It forces a more micro, detailed look at what information you do want to share, and not only that, but how you want to share it. And there's different technologies like Socrata that help you share data in a more secure way.
Because then the thing is, then there are just so many rules, right? If for every piece of data, you have to figure out what you want to share, how you want to share it, who has what permissions to it. You start to feel like just writing the MOU becomes like a divorce contract or something.
And you also have to like predict out, okay, what's every possible way this data can be used? Can it be used for any nefarious reason? And, you have to go through that mindset of like, all right, how can they use this data?
And what you want in like an emergency is some big lever that you can like throw so that suddenly it's all free again, because otherwise you're just gonna have to write up contracts to share it in the middle of an emergency.
Yeah.
Well, just imagine the New York City and the size of New York, right? You have so many organizations and partners, and you imagine just signing an individual data sharing agreement for each one of them. That gets unwieldy. And then it's like, well, you have 5 organizations that have the same information, but 5 different data sharing agreements. And so now you can't match up that data and use it.
I'm going to have another shandy.
That's it. Thanks for listening, everyone. That's happy Cinco de Mayo. Mitch, Brandon, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brandon,
My
that was
pleasure.
great.
Be sure and follow Brandon on Twitter at DisasterNet, and check out his blog, disasternet.co. Sign up for his newsletter. It's great. I look forward to it every week. And follow us on Hazards at Twitter on the Hazards Podcast.
And write us those listener questions. I'm really enjoying now that we're actually starting to get some.
Yeah, we're getting some good
I'm
ones.
really enjoying them. So just keep those coming. And we'll see you next time.
See you next week.
Right.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah, it probably won't be next week. We can be on a roll. Hey, Brandon, are you still there?
I'm still here.
We didn't actually. This is a PS. We didn't actually give you a chance to say goodbye. Do you have any last words?
I'm good.